Imagine drifting alone in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean with no land in sight, no radio, and no way to call for help. Your only shelter is a small, inflatable life raft. Every sunrise brings another day of blistering heat, every sunset another night of uncertainty, and every morning begins with the same haunting question: will this be the day I die? Now imagine living like that, not for a few days, not for a few weeks, but for 76 days. It sounds impossible, I know. One man did exactly that. Hello, my friends. I'm Amber Joy. Today I'm going to tell you one of the greatest survival stories ever lived. It's the true story of Steven Callahan. In January of 1982, Steven left the Canary Islands aboard his 30-foot sailboat, Napoleon Solo. This wasn't just another sailboat. He had designed it, built much of it himself, and spent years dreaming of crossing the Atlantic alone. As the Canary Islands faded into the distance, he believed he was finally living that dream. He had no idea it was about to become a nightmare. Several days into the voyage, Steven was asleep when a violent crash threw him out of his bunk. He rushed on deck, but there was nothing to see. Whatever had struck the boat had already disappeared into the darkness. To this day, no one knows exactly what it was. Some believe it was a whale. What Steven did know was far more important. Water was pouring into the boat. He tried to stop the flooding, but within minutes it became painfully clear there was nothing he could do. Napoleon Solo was sinking. With only minutes to act, Steven launched his inflatable life raft and grabbed his emergency survival bag before climbing aboard. Then he watched as the boat he had spent years building slowly slipped beneath the Atlantic Ocean. Your home, your dream, everything you own, gone. Now you're sitting alone in a life raft, hundreds of miles from land, praying somebody will find you before your food or water runs out. At first, Steven believed rescue would come quickly, but it didn't. The first day passed, and the second. Steven kept scanning the horizon, convinced a ship would appear at any moment. Surely someone would notice a bright yellow life raft floating in the middle of the world's busiest oceans. No one did. As hope of a quick rescue faded, Steven realized something terrifying. No one was coming. If he was going to survive, he couldn't wait for someone else to save him. The responsibility for staying alive rested entirely on his shoulders. His first priority was fresh water. Without it, he knew he wouldn't survive for long. Fortunately, he had managed to save a few solar stills that used the sun to turn seawater into small amounts of drinking water, and whenever it rained, he collected every drop he could. Food came from the ocean. Using a simple hand line, he caught fish and ate them raw because there was no other choice. But catching fish created a dangerous new problem. The blood attracted sharks. Before long, Steven noticed them circling beneath the raft, sometimes bumping it as if testing what it was. That's when he made one of the most unbelievable decisions of the entire ordeal. While cleaning fish, he intentionally poked a small hole in the floor of his life raft so the bloody water could drain away instead of collecting beside him and attracting sharks. As soon as he finished, he carefully sealed the hole again. Imagine deliberately putting a hole in the only thing keeping you alive. That's crazy, but it was survival. And just when Steven thought he was beginning to adapt to life on the ocean, the Atlantic found another way to test him. The days turned into weeks, and Steven settled into a routine. Every morning he checked the raft for leaks, collected drinking water, searched the horizon for ships, and somehow found enough food to survive. And every night he hoped the next sunrise would finally bring a rescue. Instead, the ocean brought sharks. At first, they were only shadows beneath the raft, but before long, they were circling him almost every day. Sometimes they bumped the raft, other times they bit it, forcing Steven to make emergency repairs. Imagine trying to patch the only thing keeping you alive while knowing a shark is only a few feet away beneath the water. As frightening as the sharks were, they weren't his greatest enemy. The hardest battle was loneliness. Days passed without seeing another person. Weeks passed without hearing another human voice. More than once, Steven spotted ships on the horizon, and desperately he fired flares, waved a signal mirror, and shouted with everything he had. Each time his heart raced, convinced the nightmare was finally over, and each time the ships disappeared. You can only imagine how devastating that must have been to Steven. Rescue had come close enough to see, yet somehow they never saw him. 9 different ships passed close enough to rescue him. Not one of them saw him. Most people would have given up. Steven didn't. He stopped worrying about surviving and focused on surviving one more day, then another, and another. It wasn't hope that kept him alive anymore. It was discipline, determination, and the refusal to quit. Then, after more than 2 months alone on the Atlantic, Steven noticed something he hadn't seen in a long time: birds. At first, that might not sound important, but Steven had spent enough time on the ocean to know that birds often followed schools of fish. And where there were schools of fish, there were usually fishing boats. For the first time in weeks, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time: hope. Steven headed towards the birds. The birds weren't just flying overhead, they were diving into the water, feeding on fish below the surface. And Steven knew that only meant one thing: fishing boats. He searched the horizon and at first didn't see anything, and then in the far distance, he spotted a small boat. Steven grabbed everything he had to signal for help. He waved his arms, he used his signal mirror, he did everything he could to make himself visible. At first, the boat continued on its course, and Steven feared it was going to become the 10th vessel to pass him by. But then something incredible happened. The boat changed direction. The fishermen had been following the birds to find fish, and in the middle of that feeding frenzy, they spotted something they never expected: a tiny yellow life raft with a lone man waving frantically inside. As they pulled alongside the raft, the crew called out to Steven and carefully threw him a line. They steadied the raft and helped him climb aboard their fishing boat. After 76 days alone on the Atlantic Ocean, the first thing Steven saw wasn't land. It was another human face. He had drifted nearly 1,800 miles with no reasonable expectation to survive, but he did. He survived on water, solar stills, and raw fish. He outlasted sharks, storms, loneliness, and the constant temptation to give up. Years later, when people asked Steven how he survived, he talked about solving one problem at a time. And I've thought about that many times because I think that's a lesson all of us can use. Life has a way of overwhelming us when we look too far ahead. Steven didn't survive by thinking about 76 days. He survived by making it through today, then waking up and doing it again tomorrow. The next time you're facing something that feels impossible, don't try to solve the whole problem. Just take the next right step. You might be surprised where it leads. Until next time, remember, every ordinary person has an extraordinary story. I'm Amber Joy, and I'll see you in the next story.